they'll find us here. How a Japanese woman and a black soldier team up on the last day during World War II. From where I sit on my thin mattress in the barracks, I watch the younger women around me with a heavy heart. As one of the older prisoners, I feel a deep responsibility to provide what comfort I can, though my own spirit is weary. The morning sun filters through the windows, casting long shadows across the wooden floor where Yuki Mori sits alone, her face a mask of confusion and distrust. I remember clearly when she arrived yesterday. The fog had rolled in thick over Angel Island, shrouding everything in gray as the transport ship docked. Yuki stood among the group of women, her shoulders rigid with tension, eyes darting like a cornered animal. We all expected the worst. The stories we'd heard of American brutality had prepared us for nothing less. But what we found here has shaken our beliefs to the core. The American soldiers, rather than being the monsters we were warned about, showed a gentleness that none of us anticipated. I watched Yuki's face as they provided us with warm blankets and fresh clothing. Her expression shifted from fear to suspicion, then to something I recognized well, the uncomfortable feeling when reality doesn't match what we've been taught to believe. This morning, I notice how she barely touches her breakfast, though it's more food than many of us have seen in months. The bowl of rice sits half-eaten beside her as she stares out the window, lost in thought. Several other women whisper among themselves, but Yuki remains isolated, wrestling with her inner turmoil. "Yuki-san," I call softly, motioning for her to join me. She hesitates before moving to sit beside me, her movements careful and measured. The morning light catches the shadows under her eyes. She clearly hasn't slept well. "I don't understand," she whispers, her voice barely audible. "They treat us like humans. Why? After everything?" I reach out and pat her hand gently. "Perhaps that is exactly why," I say. "Because we are human, all of us." She pulls her hand away, shaking her head. "But we were taught. They were supposed to be." Her voice trails off, unable to reconcile the stark difference between expectation and reality. Through the window, we watch as American soldiers go about their morning duties. One stops to help an elderly prisoner who's struggling with her water bucket, taking it from her with a kind smile and carrying it himself. The simple act of kindness seems to disturb Yuki even more. "It's easier when they're monsters," I say softly, understanding her struggle. "When they match the stories we were told. This kindness, it forces us to question everything we believed." Yuki's hands clench in her lap. "How can you be so calm about this? How can you accept there?" She gestures helplessly at the clean barracks, the adequate food, the medical care we've received. "I'm not accepting anything," I tell her. "I'm observing, just as you must. Watch with clear eyes, Yuki-san. See what is, not what you were told would be." She falls silent, but I can see the conflict raging behind her eyes. The stories of American cruelty, so deeply ingrained, clash against the reality of their humanitarian treatment. It's a battle I know will not be resolved quickly. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. I watch from my corner of the mess hall as the young women file in for breakfast. My eyes drift to Yuki-san, who sits alone as usual, her shoulders tense and rigid. She reminds me of myself when I first arrived, so full of anger and fear. The morning light filters through the dusty windows, casting long shadows across the wooden tables where we prisoners gather. The American soldiers move about their duties, and I notice the tall black soldier they call Sergeant Monroe. He carries himself differently from the others. There's a gentleness in his movements that speaks of understanding. Perhaps he knows something of suffering, too. "Gohan," he says softly as he serves the rice, his pronunciation careful and respectful. I've noticed he's taken the time to learn a few Japanese words. Such a small thing, yet it speaks volumes. When he reaches Yuki-san's place, I see something that makes my tired heart warm. Without fanfare, he adds an extra scoop of rice to her bowl. His smile is gentle, genuine, the kind that reaches the eyes. Yuki-san freezes, her chopsticks hovering midair. I can read the conflict on her face as clearly as if it were written there. We were all taught that Americans were monsters, brutal, savage beings who would torture and kill us without mercy. Yet here is this man, offering kindness with no strings attached. I see Yuki-san's hands trembling slightly as she stares at the extra portion. "Thank you, ma'am," Sergeant Monroe says quietly before moving on, giving her space to process. This simple act of compassion, I understand her struggle. It's easier to hold on to hatred when the enemy matches your expectations. But kindness? Kindness cuts through our defenses like a warm knife through ice. I watch as Yuki-san picks at her food, her movements mechanical, lost in thought. After a few minutes, she abruptly stands and hurries from the mess hall, leaving her bowl half full. Through the window, I see her making her way back to our barracks, her steps quick and uneven. My old bones ache to follow her, to share the wisdom that has come with my years of captivity. CDF, that sometimes the greatest battle we face is not with our captors but with the walls we build within ourselves. As the days pass, I notice Yuki-san watching Sergeant Monroe from the shadows of doorways and corners. She thinks she's being subtle, but I see how her dark eyes follow him as he goes about his duties. I see her confusion when he helps an elderly prisoner carry her laundry, her surprise when he tips his hat respectfully to each woman he passes. Each morning, he continues to give her that extra portion of rice with the same warm smile, never demanding acknowledgement or gratitude. And each morning, I watch as another brick in Yuki-san's wall of certainty begins to crumble. Sometimes, in the quiet moments between dusk and darkness, I catch her staring at her hands, lost in thought. I wonder if she's starting to understand what I learned long ago, that the lines between friend and enemy are not as clear as we once believed them to be, that sometimes humanity shows itself in the smallest of gestures, like an extra scoop of rice and a gentle smile. From where I sit on the wooden bench near the mess hall, I can see young Yuki standing by the fence. My old bones ache as I watch her, seeing the familiar tension in her shoulders that we all carried when we first arrived. The afternoon sun casts long shadows across the dusty yard, where American soldiers perform their drills, their movements precise and disciplined. I notice how Yuki's eyes follow Sergeant Monroe, Clancy, as the other soldiers call him. He stands apart from the others, not just in his appearance but in the way he carries himself. There's a dignity about him that reminds me of the Buddhist monks from my village. When their eyes meet across the yard, I see Yuki stiffen, but Clancy simply offers her a respectful nod. To my surprise, she returns it with a slight bow of her head. Later, as the sun begins its descent, I watch Yuki sitting alone on a crate near the supply shed. She's been avoiding the rest of us lately, carrying her burden of confusion and guilt like a heavy stone. My heart aches for her. I recognize the struggle within her, the same one I faced when I first experienced the Americans' unexpected kindness. Sergeant Monroe approaches her, his footsteps measured and careful, like someone approaching a frightened deer. "Miss Mori," he says softly, "I noticed you didn't eat much at lunch. Are you feeling all right?" From my vantage point, I can see Yuki's shoulders tense. "I am fine," she responds curtly, her English clipped and formal. But Clancy doesn't leave. Instead, he remains standing there, his presence somehow both commanding and gentle. "The kitchen still has some rice left from lunch," he offers. "I could bring you a bowl if you'd like." I watch as something shifts in Yuki's posture. Her hands, which were tightly clasped in her lap, slowly relax. "Why?" she asks, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you kind to us?" Clancy takes a moment before responding, and I lean forward slightly to hear his words. "Because kindness shouldn't depend on which side of a war someone's on," he says simply. The silence that follows feels heavy with meaning. Yuki's face shows a mixture of emotions, confusion, resistance, and something else, perhaps the first glimpse of trust trying to break through her carefully constructed walls. When Clancy finally walks away, I see Yuki's hand move to her chest, as if trying to contain the conflicting emotions within. Her expression reminds me of ripples disturbing still water. The surface of her certainty has been touched, and the waves are spreading outward. The next morning brings news that travels through the camp like a swift breeze. I'm helping in the infirmary when 2 American soldiers walk past, their voices carrying through the open window. They're discussing Germany's imminent surrender, their tones excited but hushed. I glance at Yuki, who's bringing fresh linens, and see her freeze mid-step. Her face grows distant, and I know her thoughts have turned to Japan, to the family and friends she left behind. These moments of humanity, both given and received, are slowly changing us all, whether we want them to or not. I watch from my thin mattress as the young women go about their morning tasks. My bones ache more than usual today, and the dampness in the air settles deep into my joints. Through the barracks window, I can see the American soldiers unloading supplies from their trucks, food, medicine, and other necessities they provide us with surprising regularity. The laundry area buzzes with activity as several of our women, including Yuki, work at washing the linens. My heart goes out to Yuki, especially Denines, so young, yet carrying such heaviness in her spirit. I've tried to guide her, to help her see that not all Americans are the monsters we were taught to fear. I attempt to rise from my bed, determined to help with the daily chores despite my weakening body. The room spins suddenly, and my chest tightens with a familiar pain. I grasp at the wooden post of my bed, but my fingers won't hold. The floor rushes up to meet me. "Keiko-san," I hear voices cry out. Through my blurred vision, I see several women running toward me. Yuki's face appears above mine, her eyes wide with concern. She cradles my head in her lap, speaking soft words I can barely hear. More footsteps approach, heavier ones. Sergeant Monroe arrives with the camp medic, their faces etched with worry. The young sergeant kneels beside me, his gentle hands helping to lift me back onto my bed. The medic checks my pulse, his frown deepening. "Her heart's very weak," he mutters to Monroe. "We need to get her to the infirmary. I want to tell them not to worry, that this old body has simply reached its limit, but the words won't come. Through the afternoon, they do what they can, bringing medicine, cool cloths for my fever, spoonfuls of broth. Yuki stays by my side, her small hand clutched in mine. As evening falls, I feel myself drifting. The pain has subsided, replaced by a peaceful numbness. I squeeze Yuki's hand weakly, trying to convey what I can no longer say, that she must find a way to let go of her anger, to embrace the possibility of peace. The last things I hear are Yuki's quiet sobs and Sergeant Monroe's deep voice offering a prayer. Then darkness takes me, gentle as cherry blossoms, falling in spring. When my spirit departs, I watch as the American soldiers handle my body with unexpected reverence. They clean and wrap me carefully in fresh white sheets, their movements respectful and solemn. Yuki stands nearby, her face a mask of grief and confusion as she witnesses their care for even a dead enemy. The soldiers speak in hushed tones as they prepare my body for burial. Their compassion strikes a sharp contrast to the brutal tales we'd been told of American barbarism. Even in death, they treat me with dignity. I see the conflict in Yuki's eyes as she watches them work, the way she struggles between her ingrained hatred and the undeniable evidence of their humanity. My heart aches for her, for all my sisters still caught in the grip of war's bitter legacy. The next days pass in a blur of grief as the camp prepares a proper memorial. The Americans provide incense and allow our traditional rites, standing respectfully aside as the women perform the ceremonies. Yuki moves through it all like a shadow, her face blank but her eyes storming with emotions she cannot express. In these moments, I wish I could still reach out, could tell her that this sorrow she feels, this recognition of our shared humanity, is the first step toward healing. But my time for teaching has passed. She must find her own path now through the darkness of loss and the confusing dawn of understanding. I watch from my place in the spirit realm as the women file away from my burial site. The morning fog clings to Angel Island like a mother's embrace, hiding tears that fall freely from eyes that once held such hatred. My heart aches for them, especially for Yuki, who stands alone at the edge of the group, her shoulders rigid with grief and confusion. Through my new sight, I can see how she withdraws into herself in the days that follow. She takes her meals alone, works in silence, and avoids the comfort offered by our sisters in captivity. The walls she builds around herself are as visible to me now as the barbed wire that surrounds the camp. But I also see what she does not yet understand. I observe her watching Sergeant Monroe, Clancy, as the other soldiers call him, with growing curiosity. From my vantage point, I notice how her eyes follow him as he makes his rounds, the way she pauses in her work when he passes by. Clancy moves through the camp with a quiet dignity that reminds me of the monks who used to visit our village temple. He treats everyone, prisoner and soldier alike, with the same gentle respect. When Private Thompson drops his mess tray, Clancy helps clean up without a word of reproach. When Mrs. Tanaka struggles with her arthritis while hanging laundry, he adjusts the line lower for her, earning a bow of gratitude. These small acts of kindness do not go unnoticed by Yuki, though she tries to hide her interest. I see her watching as Clancy helps young Betty Chen write a letter home, his patient smile as he explains the English words and she struggles with. When he shares his water ration with old Mrs. Sato during a particularly hot afternoon, Yuki's expression softens almost imperceptibly. One evening, as the sun sets behind the San Francisco skyline, I hover near the mess hall where Yuki sits alone, pushing rice around her plate. Clancy approaches, his footsteps deliberately heavy to announce his presence. "Miss Mori," he says softly. "May I speak with you for a moment?" I see the internal struggle play across Yuki's face, the instinct to refuse warring with something else, something new and uncertain. After a long pause, she nods slightly. Clancy sits across from her, leaving enough space to be respectful. "I know you were close to Mrs. Keiko," he says. "Sometimes it helps to talk about those we've lost." Yuki's hands tremble slightly as she sets down her chopsticks. "She was." Her voice is barely above a whisper. "She was kind, like a mother to us all." "Yes, she was," Clancy agrees simply. They sit in silence. For a moment, but it's different from Yuki's usual withdrawn quiet. There's something tender in this shared moment of remembrance. For the first time since my passing, I see Yuki's shoulders relax slightly. She looks up at Clancy, really looks at him, and I can sense the walls around her heart beginning to crack. Their conversation is brief, just a few words about how I used to sing traditional songs to help the younger women sleep. But in those moments, something shifts. A bridge begins to form across the vast divide of war and prejudice. As I watch them in the growing dusk, I feel a profound sense of peace. Even in death, I can serve as a catalyst for understanding, for the slow but steady healing of wounded hearts. I watch from my usual spot near the barracks window as an unusual commotion stirs the camp. The American soldiers are gathering in small groups, their voices carrying an excitement I haven't heard before. Even through my weakened state, I can sense something significant has changed. Germany has surrendered. I hear one soldier tell another. The news spreads quickly through the camp like ripples in a pond. I notice Yuki standing alone by the fence, her thin frame rigid with tension as she too observes the shifting mood among our captors. My heart aches for her. Young Yuki, so full of pride and pain. I've watched her these past weeks, seen how she struggles with the kindness shown by Sergeant Monroe. Such a gentle man. That one. Despite my years of wisdom, even I was surprised by the depth of humanity we've encountered here. Through my window, I see Sergeant Monroe approach Yuki. He keeps a respectful distance, but his presence seems to draw her attention like a moth to flame. I can't hear their words, but I see how she unconsciously turns toward him, how her shoulders relax slightly when he speaks. "Japan might be next," one of the other women whispers as she brings me my medicine. "What will become of us then?" I watch Yuki's reaction to these whispered conversations. Her face remains stoic, but I know her well enough now to see the conflict in her eyes. She was raised to believe in the Empire's strength, in our inevitable victory. Now, those certainties are crumbling like autumn leaves. The American soldiers seem more relaxed today. Some are even smiling as they go about their duties. Sergeant Monroe continues his rounds, but I notice how often his path crosses near where Yuki works in the laundry area. She pretends not to notice, but I see how her eyes follow him when she thinks no one is watching. As evening approaches, the camp commander calls everyone together. The official announcement of Germany's surrender rings out across the yard. The American soldiers cheer, some embrace each other. Even some of the other prisoners manage small smiles, perhaps hoping this means the war's end is near. But Yuki stands apart, her face a mask of confusion. I understand her struggle. How does one reconcile years of taught hatred with the reality of kindness? How does one remain loyal to a cause when doubt has taken root? I see Sergeant Monroe watching her too, concern evident in his gentle eyes. He makes no move to approach her now, seeming to understand her need for space. Such wisdom in that man. The celebration is brief, but meaningful. As the prisoners return to their barracks, I notice Yuki lingering behind. She stares at the setting sun as if seeking answers in its fading light. The uncertainty of our future weighs heavily on all of us, but perhaps most heavily on her young shoulders. From my window, I observe as she finally turns to go inside. For a moment, her expression softens, and I catch a glimpse of something new in her eyes. Not quite hope, but perhaps the beginning of acceptance. The world is changing around us, and whether we wish it or not, we must change with it. The night settles over the camp, but sleep doesn't come easily. I hear Yuki tossing in her bunk, no doubt wrestling with thoughts of what this news means for Japan, for all of us. The next few days will bring more changes, I'm certain. Already I see the soldiers speaking more openly about their plans for after the war, their attention to us growing more casual with each passing day. From my cot near the window, I hear it first, the shrill, piercing wail of the air raid siren cutting through the peaceful afternoon. My old bones ache as I struggle to rise. But the American soldiers are already rushing into our barracks, urgently directing us toward the shelter. Move quickly, ladies. This is not a drill. Sergeant Monroe's steady voice carries over the chaos. I watch as he helps some of the older women, his movements efficient but gentle. My eyes find Yuki, frozen in place, her face a mask of terror. She's never been good with sudden changes. Yuki-chan, I call out to her softly, using the familiar term to break through her fear. Come, child. She snaps out of her daze and hurries to help me. Together, we make our way to the underground shelter, Yuki's arm supporting my frail frame. The shelter is cramped and dark, filled with the sound of worried whispers and rapid breathing. Yuki helps me settle against one wall, then stands rigidly beside me. I notice how Sergeant Monroe positions himself near us, his presence a calm anchor in the storm of anxiety. The minutes drag by like hours. The siren continues its mournful cry above us. In the dim light, I observe how Yuki's hands tremble slightly. Without a word, Sergeant Monroe offers her his canteen. She hesitates for just a moment before accepting it, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. Just breathe, he tells her quietly. You're safe here. His words seem to reach something deep inside her, and I watch as some of the tension leaves her shoulders. Suddenly, the all-clear signal sounds. The relief in the shelter is palpable, but as we file out, I can see the strain on everyone's faces. False alarm or not, the fear was real. That evening, as we prepare for bed, I notice Yuki's restlessness. She paces our barracks like a caged bird, unable to settle. Through the window, I see Sergeant Monroe making his rounds. He pauses near our building, and for a moment, their eyes meet through the glass. He doesn't say anything, just stands there, a steady presence in the gathering darkness. Yuki doesn't move away from the window. Instead, she places her hand against the glass, a gesture so small yet so telling. Sergeant Monroe nods once, understanding in his eyes, before continuing his patrol. Yuki, I say softly in Japanese. Sometimes the heart knows what the mind refuses to accept. She turns to me, conflict written across her face. Keiko-san, I don't know what to feel anymore. Everything I was taught, everything I believed. War teaches us to hate, I tell her, my voice gentle. Peace teaches us to love. Which lesson will you choose to learn? She doesn't answer, but I see tears gathering in her eyes. She returns to her bunk, but I know sleep won't come easily tonight. I watch as she tosses and turns, her mind no doubt full of questions she's afraid to answer. In the quiet darkness of our barracks, I hear her soft, shaky breaths as she fights against her tears. The walls we build around our hearts can be the strongest prisons of all, I think to myself. But perhaps today's fear has created a crack in those walls, one that might allow love to finally seep through. I watch from my corner of the barracks as Yuki and the American sergeant sit on a wooden bench near the fence. The late afternoon sun casts long shadows across their faces. My old bones ache, but my heart warms at the sight. After weeks of seeing Yuki withdraw into herself, it brings me joy to witness this small opening of her spirit. Their voices drift toward me on the summer breeze. Yuki speaks softly at first, her words hesitant like a butterfly testing its wings. My father was a schoolteacher before the war, she tells Sergeant Monroe. He believed in discipline, in honor. He taught me that our emperor was divine, that our cause was just. Her voice catches. Now I don't know what to believe anymore. The sergeant listens with such gentle attention that even from where I sit, I can feel his compassion. It reminds me of my own husband, now gone, who could listen with his whole heart. My mother died when I was young, Yuki continues, her words gaining strength. Father raised me alone. He wanted me to be strong, to never show weakness. She pauses, picking at a loose thread on her sleeve. I wonder sometimes if he survived the bombing of Tokyo. Sergeant Monroe nods slowly. It's okay to wonder, to worry about them, he says. War doesn't take away our right to love our families. I see Yuki's shoulders tense, but how can the war truly end, after everything that's happened? The sergeant shifts slightly on the bench, his uniform crisp despite the day's heat. The war will end because it must, he says. People can only carry hatred for so long before it becomes too heavy. Look at Germany. They've already surrendered. Peace is coming, Miss Mori. It won't be easy, but the world always finds a way to heal. I notice Yuki's hands, usually clenched tight in her lap, slowly relax. But what happens to us then? To Japan? Your people are strong, the sergeant replies. Strong enough to rebuild, to create something new from the ashes. Just like you're doing right now, finding the courage to hope again. A small smile, the first I've seen in weeks, touches Yuki's lips. Sergeant Monroe, she says, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you for your kindness, for treating us like people. The sergeant stands, straightening his uniform. That's all we are in the end, Miss Mori. Just people trying to find our way home. As he walks away, Yuki remains on the bench, her face turned toward the setting sun. I see something new in her expression, a softening, the spark of hope that wasn't there before. It reminds me of watching the first cherry blossoms open after a long winter. The days that follow bring a gradual ease to the camp's atmosphere. The guards' steps are lighter, their voices less stern. Even the air feels different, charged with the possibility of peace, rather than the weight of war. I notice Yuki walking with her head held higher, her eyes meeting those of others instead of staying fixed on the ground. From my corner, I continue to watch and pray, hoping that this fragile peace taking root in our young Yuki's heart will spread like ripples in a pond, touching all those around her with its quiet grace. From my spot near the window, I watch the morning unfold like any other. My old bones ache as I shift on my thin mattress, but today feels different. There's an electricity in the air, a tension that makes even my weathered heart beat faster. The first signs come with the running footsteps of the American soldiers outside. Then, the shouting begins. Not angry shouts, but excited ones. Young Private Thompson bursts into our barracks, his face flushed with emotion. Japan has surrendered, he announces, his voice cracking. The war is over. The words hang in the air like smoke. Some of the women around me begin to weep. Others sit in stunned silence. My eyes find Yuki, who stands frozen by her bunk, her face a mask of confusion. I've watched her these past months, seen her walls slowly crumble under Sergeant Monroe's quiet kindness. Through my clouded vision, I see Sergeant Monroe, CN Clancy, as some call him, enter the barracks. He moves with that careful dignity of his, making his way directly to Yuki. She doesn't move, doesn't acknowledge him, but I can see the tears sliding down her cheeks. Miss Mori, he says softly, using that respectful tone he's always maintained. Would you like to step outside for a moment? I watch as Yuki nods numbly, following him to the door. My old bones protest as I shift to keep them in view through the window. They stand there in the morning light, and I can see Clancy speaking gently to her. Though I can't hear his words, I recognize the compassion in his stance, the careful way he maintains a respectful distance while still offering comfort. Yuki's shoulders begin to shake. I've known this moment would come, when the weight of everything would finally break through her careful control. In all my years, I've seen how war changes people, how it strips away our pretenses, until we're left with nothing but our raw humanity. It's really over? I hear her ask, her voice carrying through the thin walls. Yes, ma'am, Clancy responds. It's over. More tears fall from Yuki's eyes, and I feel my own vision blur. These aren't just tears of relief or sadness. They're tears of release. I've seen them before, in my own reflection, when I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of our circumstances. What happens now? Yuki's question hangs in the air. Clancy takes a moment before responding, choosing his words carefully as he always does. Now we heal, he says. It won't be easy, and it won't be quick, but we heal. I see Yuki nod slowly, wiping at her tears. There's a new understanding in her face, something I've been hoping to see. She's finally letting go of the hatred she carried like armor. They'll find us here, she whispers, echoing words I've heard Clancy say before. But now they carry a different weight, a different meaning. It's not about enemies finding us anymore. It's about finding ourselves, finding peace in the aftermath of so much pain. The morning sun grows stronger, casting long shadows across the camp. I watch as Yuki and Clancy stand in comfortable silence, two souls who found understanding across the divisions of war. My heart feels lighter, despite everything. This is what survival looks like, not just living through the darkness, but finding light in unexpected places. I watch from my cot as Yuki folds her meager belongings with trembling hands. After all these months of captivity, the day of departure has finally arrived. Though my body grows weaker each day, I can still sense the turmoil in her heart. The young woman who arrived filled with hatred now stands transformed, and I know Sergeant Monroe played no small part in that change. "Yuki-chan," I call softly, my voice barely above a whisper. She turns to me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Come sit with me for a moment." She kneels beside my cot, her movements graceful despite her inner turbulence. The morning sun streams through the barracks window, catching the silver strands in her dark hair. Far too many for someone so young, but war ages us all differently. "Your heart is heavy," I observe, reaching out to pat her hand. It is not easy to leave behind someone who has shown such kindness. Yuki's shoulders tense, but she doesn't deny it. "Keiko-san, how can I feel this way? He is American, and yet, he showed us that humanity knows no borders." I finish for her. There is no shame in that recognition. Through the window, I can see Sergeant Monroe directing the preparation for our departure. Even now, he maintains his dignified bearing, though I notice how his eyes frequently drift toward our barracks. The man carries his own burdens, the weight of being different in his own country, yet he never let that embitter him. "The transport ships will arrive soon," Yuki murmurs, her gaze also fixed on the activity outside. I squeeze her hand gently. "Then you must not waste these precious moments in doubt. Go to him, Yuki-chan. Speak what is in your heart." She hesitates, torn between propriety and desire. I have watched this internal battle rage within her for weeks now, as the war's end drew closer. "But what would people think?" "They will think what they will think," I tell her firmly. "But you will carry these moments for the rest of your life. Make them worth remembering." Yuki stands slowly, smoothing her worn dress with shaking hands. Through the window, I see Sergeant Monroe pause in his work, looking our way. Even from here, I can see the gentleness in his expression. "Thank you, Keiko-san," Yuki whispers, "for everything." I watch as she walks toward the door, her steps growing more confident with each stride. Before she exits, she turns back to me one last time. I nod encouragingly, my heart full of hope for her future. "Sometimes," I say softly, "though she's already gone, the greatest victories in war are not won on battlefields, but in the quiet moments when we learn to see the humanity in those we once called enemy." From my window, I observe their final meeting. They stand apart, maintaining proper distance, but their connection transcends the space between them. Words pass between them, too soft for me to hear, but I see how Yuki's shoulders relax, how Sergeant Monroe's smile reaches his eyes. The whistle blows, our signal to prepare for departure. Yet in this moment, I witness something beautiful. Two souls, divided by war, but united by compassion, sharing one last precious moment of understanding. It gives me hope that perhaps, from the ashes of this terrible conflict, something good can grow after all. As I watched Yuki descend the gangplank, my heart ached with a bittersweet mixture of joy and sorrow. From my place in the spirit realm, I could see how much she had changed since our time together at Angel Island. The proud, angry young woman who had first arrived at the camp was gone. In her place stood someone different, someone whose eyes held both wisdom and uncertainty. Her family waited at the bottom of the gangplank, her elderly father in his worn military uniform, her mother clutching a handkerchief, and her younger sister bouncing on her toes. They rushed forward to embrace her, but I noticed how Yuki's body stiffened slightly before relaxing into their arms. Her response reminded me of those first days after her arrival at Angel Island, when she would tense at any approach. The bustling port of Yokohama around them was a stark reminder of the war's devastation. American military police directed traffic, while Japanese dock workers unloaded supplies under their supervision. Buildings stood as hollow shells, their windows dark and empty. The sight seemed to overwhelm Yuki. I saw her eyes dart around, taking in the destruction she'd been away from for so long. At home, Yuki sat stiffly on her cushion as her mother served tea in chipped cups. The familiar ritual felt foreign to her now. I could see it in the way her hands trembled slightly as she lifted the cup. Her family spoke of neighbors and local news, but their words seemed to wash over her like waves on a distant shore. "The Americans treated you well?" her father finally asked, his voice gruff with emotion. Yuki's eyes grew distant. "Yes," she said softly. "They were kind." The word hung in the air between them, A father's face tightened, and her mother looked down at her hands. They couldn't understand, how their daughter could speak of kindness from the enemy. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken thoughts. In the days that followed, I watched Yuki move through her old life like a ghost. She helped her mother with housework and taught her sister English, but her mind often drifted to Angel Island, to Sergeant Monroe, Clancy, and his gentle smile, to the way he had shown her that humanity could exist even between supposed enemies. The neighborhood women whispered behind their hands when she passed, their eyes following her with suspicion. A former prisoner of war, returned from America. Could she still be trusted? Yuki held her head high, but I saw how each whisper cut her like a knife. One evening, as she sat alone in the garden, I wished I could reach out and comfort her as I once had. She pulled something from her sleeve, the small, wooden cross Clancy had given her. Her fingers traced its rough edges as tears slid down her cheeks. "They'll find us here," she whispered to herself, echoing Clancy's words. "Together in peace." In that moment, I saw the first real smile cross her face since her return. Despite the ruins around her, despite the whispers and suspicious glances, she had found something precious in her heart. The understanding that compassion could bridge even the widest gaps between people. As the sun set behind the broken buildings of Yokohama, Yuki tucked the cross back into her sleeve, close to her heart. The war had ended, but her journey, the one that began with a simple act of kindness in an American prison camp, was just beginning. From where I sat in my favorite corner of the garden, watching Yuki tend to the chrysanthemums, I could see the subtle changes in her demeanor. The morning mail had brought something special. I could tell by the way her hands trembled slightly as she held the bronzed envelope, her eyes widening at the familiar military postmark. "Keiko-san," she called out softly, making her way to where I rested on my cushioned bench. "It's from him, from Sergeant Monroe." I smiled, remembering the tall, dignified African-American soldier who had shown such kindness to us at Angel Island. Though my health had been failing then, I had observed their tentative friendship blooming amidst the harsh realities of war. Yuki settled beside me, carefully opening the letter. The autumn breeze carried the scent of fallen leaves as she began to read aloud, translating the English words into Japanese for my benefit. Clancy's words were simple but profound, speaking of his return to civilian life in Georgia and the challenges he faced in a still segregated America. He says he often thinks of Angel Island. Yuki's voice softened. Of how strange it was that in a place meant to contain enemies, he found friendship instead. I watched as her fingers traced the careful penmanship. Clancy wrote of working as a medical orderly in a small clinic, continuing to help others as he had done in the camp. He mentioned specific moments, the day he'd given Yuki extra rice portions, the quiet conversations they'd shared by the fence, and even my own passing, which he said had affected him deeply. "He remembers us all," Yuki whispered, her eyes glistening. "He asks about you, Keiko-san, about whether I've found peace since returning home." The letter brought back memories of our time in the camp, not just the hardships, but the unexpected moments of grace. I had watched Yuki transform from a bitter, frightened young woman into someone who could recognize kindness in the face of an enemy. Clancy had been instrumental in that change. "You should write back," I suggested gently, watching her fold the letter with careful precision. "Tell him about your journey." Yuki nodded, already reaching for her writing supplies. As she began to compose her response, I could see the emotions playing across her face: gratitude, nostalgia, and a profound understanding of how that time had changed her. Her brush moved steadily across the paper as she wrote in her best English. She told Clancy about our small village, about the slow process of rebuilding not just our homes but our hearts. She described how his kindness had taught her to see beyond hatred, how it had given her hope when she needed it most. "Should I tell him about the garden?" she asked, looking up at me. "About how we're growing American flowers alongside our Japanese ones?" "Yes," I smiled. "He would like that symbolism." As Yuki continued writing, pouring her heart onto the page, I could see the healing prison of wearer of this correspondence. Each word seemed to bridge the vast ocean between them, connecting two souls who had found humanity in the midst of war. She finished the letter with a simple message of thanks, expressing hope that their friendship could continue to grow despite the distance. As she sealed the envelope, I saw in her face the same quiet strength I had witnessed emerging in those final days at Angel Island. Stop here as per instructions. The scene covers the letter exchange and Yuki's response, showing the impact through Keiko's perspective. From where I lay in my small bed in the camp barracks, I watched Yuki through the window. She had changed so much since her arrival at Angel Island. The young woman who once carried hatred like armor now stood at the edge of the exercise yard, her face tilted toward the morning sun. Even in those final days of the war, with my health failing, I could see the transformation happening within her. Sergeant Monroe, Eye of Clancy, as some called him, passed by, and I noticed how Yuki's posture softened ever so slightly. Gone was the rigid defensiveness that had marked her early days here. Instead, there was an openness, a willingness to acknowledge the humanity in others that had been missing before. My cough grew, worse that morning, and as I pulled the thin blanket closer, I remembered the first time I saw Yuki's walls begin to crack. It was during meal service, when Clancy had offered her that extra portion of rice with nothing but kindness in his eyes. The look of confusion on her face that day told me everything. How could an enemy show such compassion? Through my fevered haze, I watched their careful dance over the following weeks. Each small interaction, every gentle word exchanged, slowly wore away at the prejudices that had been drilled into Yuki since childhood. It was like watching ice melt in spring, gradual, inevitable, and ultimately transformative. Water, Keiko-san? Yuki's voice drew me from my memories. She had noticed my discomfort and come inside, carrying a tin cup. Her eyes, once hard with suspicion, now held genuine concern. This was not the same woman who had arrived at Angel Island months ago, believing all Americans to be monsters. "Thank you, child," I managed, between coughs. "You have learned much here." She knelt beside my bed, her hands steady as she helped me drink. "I was wrong about so many things," she whispered, more to herself than to me. The hatred I carried, it was like a poison. I reached for her hand, my grip weak but determined. "And now?" "Now." She glanced out the window, where Clancy was still visible, going about his duties. "Now I understand what you tried to tell me when I first arrived. That kindness has no borders, that people are just people, no matter which side of the war they're on." My breath came harder, but I needed to speak. "You see now? Why I told you to watch and learn? The Americans. They could have treated us with cruelty. Instead, they showed us dignity." Yuki finished. "Especially Sergeant Monroe. Despite everything his own country has done to him, he still chooses kindness." Through my failing vision, I saw tears forming in her eyes. She had learned what I had hoped she would, that the true victory in war is not in defeating an enemy, but in discovering our shared humanity. "Remember this," I whispered, feeling the weakness growing in my limbs. "Remember what you learned here. This is how we build peace, one heart at a time." Yuki squeezed my hand gently, and in that moment, I knew my work was done. She would carry these lessons forward, this understanding that had been so dearly bought. The hatred that had once defined her was gone, replaced by something far more prison of weariful, hope. I watched from above as Yuki entered the grand conference hall in Geneva, her steps confident yet humble. Though I had passed many years ago at Angel Island, my spirit has followed her journey, bearing witness to how that scared young woman transformed into the poised businesswoman before me. The morning sun streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished marble floor. My heart swelled with pride as she navigated through the crowd of international delegates. She wore a simple dark blue suit, her graying hair elegantly styled, so different from the frightened prisoner I had known. At 65, her face showed the gentle lines of wisdom, but her eyes still held that same determined spark I remembered. I drifted closer as she paused near a refreshment table, scanning the room. Suddenly, her hand trembled slightly as she set down her teacup. There, across the hall, stood a familiar tall figure, Sergeant Clarence Monroe, though he hadn't worn a uniform in decades. His hair had turned white, but he carried himself with that same quiet dignity I remembered from our days in the camp. Their eyes met across the crowded room. For a moment they both stood frozen, as if the years between them had melted away. Then Clancy's face broke into that warm smile I remembered so well, the same smile that had once offered hope to desperate prisoners. "Miss Mori?" he called out, making his way through the crowd. "Yuki?" "Sergeant Monroe," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Then, correcting herself, "Clancy." They embraced like old friends, and I felt tears in my spirit eyes. Here were two souls who had found each other across the depths of hatred and fear, now meeting again in a place dedicated to peace. "I never thought I'd see you again," Yuki said, stepping back to look at him properly. "When I saw your name on the conference list as a speaker, I could hardly believe it." "Life has a way of bringing people full circle," Clancy replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Look at us now, both working for reconciliation, trying to heal old wounds." They found a quiet corner where they could talk. I hovered near them, listening as they shared stories of the years between. Clancy spoke of his work with veteran groups, helping former soldiers process their experiences. Yuki told him about her business ventures and her volunteer work with war survivors in Japan. "Do you remember what you told me at Angel Island?" Yuki asked. "They'll find us here?" I never forgot those words. Clancy nodded slowly. "I meant that someday, people would find proof that even in the darkest times, humanity can shine through, that enemies can become friends." "You were right," Yuki said softly. "Look at us now, proof that love is stronger than hate." I watched as they continued talking, their conversation flowing easily between memories of the past and hopes for the future. The fear and mistrust that had once divided them had long since transformed into something beautiful, a friendship that transcended borders, culture, and time itself. Stop here as per the instructions, having covered the reunion, their emotional meeting, and their discussion of shared experiences. From my spot in the back of the crowded auditorium, I watch Yuki take her place at the podium. Though I am no longer alive in body, my spirit lingers near her, proud of the woman she has become. The conference hall buzzes with anticipation. As she adjusts the microphone, her hands steady but her eyes bright with emotion. 20 years ago, I arrived at Angel Island as a prisoner of war. She begins, her voice clear and strong. I carried hatred in my heart, taught to see Americans as monsters. But what I found there changed me forever. I remember those dark days, when fear and distrust ruled our hearts. As I watch her speak, I see echoes of the young woman who once sat beside me in the camp, wrestling with her anger and confusion. Now she stands tall, transformed by time and understanding. "There was a soldier there," Yuki continues, "Sergeant Clarence Monroe. We called him Clancy. He showed me kindness when I expected cruelty. He offered friendship when I could only give hostility in return. Through his actions, I learned that humanity transcends the barriers we build between nations." The audience leans forward, captivated by her story. I see tears in some eyes, recognition in others. Many of these people have known war's bitter taste, have felt its poison in their hearts. "We lost many during those days," she says, "and I feel a flutter of recognition. One woman, Keiko-san, taught me about grace even in our darkest hours. She showed me that maintaining our dignity and compassion, even in captivity, was our greatest victory." My heart swells at her words. Even now, after all these years, she remembers the lessons we shared in those quiet moments, between fear and hope. "The war ended," Yuki continues, her voice growing stronger, "but the real battle was learning to let go of hatred. Every small act of kindness at that camp, an extra portion of rice, a gentle word, a respectful gesture, these things planted seeds of peace in my heart. I watch as she describes her journey from hatred to understanding, from fear to acceptance. Her words paint pictures of those days at Angel Island, not focusing on the hardships but on the moments of unexpected grace that changed her forever. Today, I stand before you not as a former enemy, but as a witness to the prison of wearer of human kindness," she declares. "War teaches us to see others as monsters, but peace requires us to recognize the humanity in everyone, even those we once called enemies." The silence in the hall is profound. I can feel the weight of her words settling over the audience like a gentle rain, washing away old prejudices, nurturing new understanding. "This is not just my story," Yuki says, her voice full of emotion. "It is the story of countless others who found their way from darkness to light, from hatred to understanding. It is proof that even in our darkest hours, kindness has the prison of wearer to transform us." As she finishes speaking, the audience rises as one. The applause thunders through the hall, but it's more than just applause. It's an affirmation, a recognition of a truth that transcends time and borders. Yuki smiles, that same gentle smile I remember from our days together, now filled with the wisdom and peace she has found. From my place in the eternal, I smile too. The seeds we planted in those dark days have bloomed into something beautiful. Through Yuki's words, our story lives on, touching hearts and building bridges between former enemies, just as those small acts of kindness once built a bridge in her own heart. From my place in the spirit world, I watch over them both, my dear Yuki and the kind Sergeant Monroe. Time has painted silver in their hair, etched gentle lines around their eyes, but their hearts remain as vibrant as ever. The conference hall bustles with activity, but they find a quiet corner near a window overlooking a peaceful garden. "Yuki-san," Clancy says, his voice still carrying that same warmth I remember from Angel Island. Though his shoulders now stoop slightly with age, his dignified bearing remains unchanged. "Your speech moved many hearts today." I see Yuki's eyes sparkle with unshed tears as she looks at her old friend. She has grown into such a strong woman, far from the angry, frightened prisoner she once was. "Clancy-san, I spoke only the truth we learned together, about how kindness can bridge any divide." They sit together on a cushioned bench, and I hover near them, my spirit drawn to their shared warmth. Sunlight streams through the window, casting a gentle glow over them both. The years have been kind to their friendship, even when distance kept them apart. "Do you remember?" Clancy asks, his weathered hands folded in his lap. "That day I gave you extra rice in the mess hall?" Yuki nods. And I remember, too, how that simple gesture had started to crack the wall of hatred she'd built around her heart. "Such a small thing," she says softly, "but it meant everything. You showed me that enemies could become friends." The world was different then, Clancy reflects, gazing out at the garden. So much hatred, so much fear. Sometimes I think about how far we've come. "And how far we still have to go," Yuki adds, her voice carrying the wisdom of years. I watch as she reaches into her handbag and pulls out an old, worn wooden cross, the one Clancy gave her all those years ago. My heart swells with pride at how she's kept it safe. "You still have it," Clancy says, his voice thick with emotion. "Of course. It reminds me of what you taught me, that peace isn't just the absence of war, but the presence of understanding." The conference continues beyond their quiet corner, but they remain in their own world of memories. I see how they've both carried their experiences at Angel Island through their lives, using them to help others find healing and reconciliation. "Remember Keiko?" Yuki asks suddenly, and I feel a surge of joy at hearing my name. She would be happy to see us here, working for peace. "She was wise," Clancy says softly. "She saw the humanity in everyone, even when it was hard to find." They sit in comfortable silence for a moment, and I wish I could tell them how proud I am of them both, how their story has touched so many lives, including mine. The anger and fear that once divided them has transformed into something beautiful, a friendship that transcends borders, cultures, and time itself. The afternoon light grows softer, casting long shadows across the conference hall floor. Around them, younger generations move with purpose, carrying forward the work of peace-building that Yuki and Clancy helped pioneer. "It's strange," Yuki says, her voice gentle with reflection, "how that terrible war brought us together, gave us this friendship." Clancy nods, understanding in his eyes. Sometimes the darkest moments can lead us to the brightest light. They sit together, these two dear friends, their presence a living testament to the prison of Wearer of Compassion. I watch over them, grateful that they found each other in that prison of war camp so many years ago. Grateful that they never lost faith in the possibility of peace. I hope you like this story. Please share. What's your favorite part of the story, and where in the world you are watching from? Have a wonderful day.